She was a broke waitress, studying nursing at night. He was the most dangerous man in Chicago, bleeding out on her counter at 2 a.m. Every instinct told her to run. Instead, she picked up a spatula and saved his life. But saving a crime lord doesn't come without a price. And the people who wanted him dead now wanted her gone too. This channel is your home for stories about ruthless mob bosses, unexpected love, and the unbreakable bonds of loyalty that no bullet can destroy. True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act when everything is on the line. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe. Notuam, because we drop new stories every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming next.
The Midnight Owl Diner was a forgotten roadside spot just beyond Chicago, a leftover from the 1980s that always smelled of burnt coffee, harsh bleach, and old cooking oil. It was a haven for the lost, the lonely, and anyone who felt more at home in the deep hours of the morning. Nora Hayes liked the late shift. At 24, it covered her rent, spared her from daytime society, and gave her a quiet space to read her worn nursing textbooks. Outside, heavy rain lashed against the diner's huge windows. The flickering neon sign over the entrance was missing a W, making it read the Midnight O, and it buzzed erratically. Inside, Nora cleaned booth 4, her thoughts focused on making next month's payment for her small Logan Square apartment. Only two other souls were present: a tired truck driver named Pete sleeping over his cold eggs, and Mr. Henderson, a hard-of-hearing retired mechanic working on a crossword. Suddenly, the bell over the entrance didn't just ring, it exploded into the silence. The door flew open with enough force to crack the frame. A gust of wind and rain swept in, bringing that sharp, metallic smell of blood. Two figures stumbled inside. The first was a massive man, his expression pure panic, his expensive suit soaked with rain and dark, wet blood. He was half carrying the second man, who was a dead weight being pulled across the floor. Pete, the trucker, snapped awake. He took one look at the big, dark pistol in the standing man's hand and made his decision. Pete bolted from his seat, dropped a rumpled $20 bill on his table, and ran for the back door without saying a word. Mr. Henderson remained focused on his puzzle, searching for a 6-letter word for disaster. Nora was frozen behind the counter, a wet cloth clenched in her fist. "Lock the door now." The man's voice was a roar, his thick Irish accent strained with panic. He had messy, sandy hair, and his eyes darted around like a trapped animal. This was Finnick O'Connor, though Nora would not learn that until later. Nora stayed still. Her heart was beating frantically inside her chest. I said, "Lock the door." Finnick pointed the firearm right at her. "Now, sweetheart, before you become part of the problem." A deep survival instinct took over. Nora let the rag fall, rushed to the door, forced it shut against the wind, and threw the heavy bolt. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably as she lowered the metal security gate. When she looked back, Finnick had placed the other man onto the main counter, pushing aside napkin holders and salt shakers, which fell with a loud clatter. The man on the counter wore a costly custom charcoal suit, now ripped and soaked with an alarming amount of blood that was forming a pool under him. It was his face that stole Nora's breath, despite being pale and twisted in pain. His features were incredibly sharp. He had high cheekbones, a strong jawline with dark stubble, and black hair stuck to his forehead with rain. She knew who he was. Anyone in Chicago who followed the news recognized that face. Declan Fitzpatrick, the new leader of the Fitzpatrick crime family, a man said to run the docks, the unions, and half the state's politicians. He was a myth, a killer in a tailored suit, and he was bleeding to death on her dessert display. "He's hurt bad," Finnick choked out, pressing his hands desperately against Declan's right side below the ribs and on another injury near his collarbone. Blood was pulsing through Finnick's fingers with a steady, awful pace. "The clinic is 20 minutes from here. He will not make it. He is losing too much." Call for an ambulance, Nora whispered, her voice shaking. No police, no hospitals, Finnick shot back, turning to her with the gun raised once more. The Russo family has eyes on every emergency room within a 10-mile radius. They set up the attack. If we take him to a hospital, he will be killed before he ever sees a surgeon. Declan made a deep, pained sound, his head falling to the side. His lips were turning a frightening shade of blue. The puddle of blood on the counter was growing, dripping onto the floor with a slow, sickening sound. He is going into hypovolemic shock, Nora stated. The words escaped her before she could think, too. Years of nursing school, abandoned when her mother's fatal illness made her quit, suddenly came rushing back to her mind. Finnick just stared, his gun hand unsteady. What? His blood pressure is crashing, Nora explained, her voice gaining strength as the clinical training she had received took over. The fear was still a cold knot inside her, but the sight of a person dying was stronger than her fear of a criminal. If the arterial bleeding is not stopped now, his heart is going to fail in under 3 minutes. Then you fix him, Finnick shouted, grabbing her apron and pulling her close. Do something, or I promise you will die right here with him. Put the gun away or he dies right now, Nora yelled back. The unexpected command in her voice surprised them both. She knocked Finnick's hand off her apron. I cannot work with a weapon pointed at me. Go wash your hands. Use the sink over there. Hot water and a lot of soap. Go. Finnick was stunned by the waitress's sudden authority, but another weak gasp from Declan made him move. He put the gun in his waistband and went to the kitchen sink. Nora acted with a focused, desperate speed. She ran to the back room, kicked the door in, and grabbed the large first aid box from the wall. She knew it was not enough. Simple bandages would not stop a bleeding artery. She hurried past the kitchen, grabbing 2 fresh linen aprons, a bottle of strong, cheap vodka kept for Mr. Henderson's coffee, and a large roll of silver duct tape. Back at the counter, Nora pushed Finnick out of the way. Point your phone's flashlight on him, and hold it still. She opened the vodka and poured it over her own hands, flinching from the burn, before dousing Declan's wounds on his chest and side. Declan's eyes shot open. They were a sharp, stormy gray, now wide with agony and shock. A deep, ragged yell tore out of him, and his hand flew up, grabbing Nora's wrist with the force of a steel trap. Hold still, Nora said, making herself meet his terrifying gaze. I know this stings. You have been shot. I need to locate the source. Declan's eyes were glassy and unfocused, but they were fixed on her. His grip was crushing her wrist, but he did not move her. He was struggling to breathe, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Nora pulled heavy kitchen scissors from her pocket and cut away his ruined suit shirt, revealing a broad, tattooed chest. The collarbone injury was a messy through and through, but it had missed the main arteries. The wound on his right side was the real killer. Dark, deoxygenated blood was pumping out steadily. She knew it had to be his liver or a major vein. Gauze, Nora ordered. Finnick nearly threw the box at her. She stuffed the side wound with a large amount of sterile dressing, but it was soaked through immediately. It is too deep. Pressure is not working, she said, her professional calm starting to crack. The artery has pulled back. I have to cauterize it. Cauterize? Finnick shouted. Are you crazy? You are a waitress. I am what you have, Nora retorted. Go to the grill. Grab the metal frosting spatula from the hook. Turn the burner on high. Heat that spatula until it glows red. Now. Finnick did not question her again. He ran. The sharp clicking of the gas stove filled the diner, followed by the whoosh of the flame. Nora looked back at Declan. He was slipping away, his eyes starting to close. Hey, listen. Stay with me, she said, tapping his face. Do not fall asleep. Declan's lips moved, forming a faint whisper above the sound of the storm. She leaned down, her ear close to his mouth. Angel, he breathed, a small bubble of blood forming on his lip. Are you here to take me? Not this time, Nora whispered back with force. "Tonight, I am only the waitress." "It is ready," Finnick yelled, running back over. He was holding the long spatula with a thick towel. The end of it was glowing a deep, angry orange. "Hold his shoulders down," Nora told Finnick. "He will fight it. Use all your weight." Finnick pressed his boss down, pinning his wide shoulders to the pastry counter. Nora took a shaky breath, her hands trembling. She knew she could not hesitate. A mistake meant burning healthy flesh, and he would still die. "I am sorry," she whispered to Declan. She forced the hot metal deep into the wound, right against the source of the bleeding. The sizzle of burning skin was awful, followed by the sharp, horrible smell of cooked meat and blood. Declan let out a scream of pure agony so loud it made the diner's glass windows vibrate. His body arched off the counter with so much force it almost threw the massive Finnick off. Declan's hands gripped the counter's edge until his knuckles were white, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he mercifully fainted from the pain. Nora pulled the spatula back, dropping it in the metal sink with a loud noise. She took clean linen aprons, folded them into a thick pad, and pressed them firmly over the seared wound. She wrapped heavy duct tape completely around Declan's body multiple times, binding the homemade dressing tightly to him. She stepped away, breathing hard, her uniform soaked with his blood. She watched his chest. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It rose and then fell. It was a shallow breath, but it was steady. The bleeding was stopping. Finnick checked the pulse on his boss's neck. He exhaled a breath that sounded like a sob. "He is alive. Oh my God, he is alive." 30 minutes later, the sound of screeching tires signaled the arrival of a black, unmarked medical van. 3 people hurried in, led by a sharp-eyed, elegant older woman with 2 very large black medical bags. This was Dr. Sofia Calvetti, the organization's private trauma surgeon. Sophia took a quick look at the scene, the blood on the counter, the vodka, the tape, and the burnt spatula. She quickly checked Declan's vital signs and the bandage. She looked over at Nora, who was crouched by the coffee machines, shivering in the warm diner. "You are the one who did this?" Sophia asked, her Italian accent making the words sharp. Nora simply nodded. "You saved his life," Sophia said in a quiet voice. "A millimeter to the left, and you would have destroyed his liver. The cauterization was terrible but perfect. He would have been dead 20 minutes ago." The men swiftly and expertly moved Declan to a portable stretcher. As they carried him to the door, Finnick stopped in front of Nora. He took out a thick, heavy wad of $100 bills from his bloody jacket and put it on the counter. It must have been at least $10,000. "You did not see anything tonight," Finnick said, his voice quiet and deadly. "No police, no talking to anyone, nothing. For your own safety, you need to forget this ever happened." Nora stared at the money covered in blood. When she looked up, the diner was silent and empty. The only evidence that the most powerful man in the Chicago underworld had nearly died on her counter was the blood on the floor and the metallic smell that remained in the air. 3 weeks went by. For Nora, they felt like a strange eternity. She had used the first 3 days to scrub the diner with bleach until her hands were raw, trying to wash away the ghost of that smell. She did not touch the money. She hid the bloody pile of cash inside an old medical book under her floorboards. Touching it felt like a curse. She searched the local news every morning, half expecting to find a story about the death of Declan Fitzpatrick. But she saw nothing. There were no death notices, and no gang war started in the city. The syndicate's official businesses, like shipping companies and real estate offices, continued to operate normally. It was almost like the stormy night at the Midnight Owl Diner had been a terrible dream. Nora tried to get back to her regular life. She served breakfast to Pete the trucker, poured coffee for Mr. Henderson, and returned home to her tiny, drafty apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. But the world had started to feel darker. It began with small things. A dark car would be parked at the end of her block when she came home. A stranger in a trench coat would sit in a booth, order only black coffee, and watch her until her shift was over. Nora told herself she was just imagining things. The Fitzpatrick syndicate had told her to forget, so they were leaving her alone. That is how it was supposed to work, she thought. She was mistaken. She just had no idea who was really after her. It was a Tuesday evening, a night she rarely had off. Nora was walking with a bag of groceries down the poorly lit, tight alley behind her apartment. The streetlights flickered, creating long, twisted shadows around the dumpsters. Nora Hayes! The voice emerged from the darkness near the fire escape. Nora stopped cold, her hands clenching the paper grocery bag. A man walked into the dim light. He was not one of the men from the diner. He was skinny, wearing a cheap leather jacket, and had a nasty scar that ran from his ear to his collar. He had a cruel, uneven smile. Behind him, two more men stepped out of the shadows, blocking her way to the street. "Who are you?" Nora asked, backing away until her shoulders pressed against the hard brick wall. "My name is Dominic," the scarred man said calmly, as he took out a long, serrated knife from his belt. "I am with Tobias Russo. You might know that name." Nora's heart sank. The Russo family, their biggest rivals, the ones who had tried to kill Declan. "I do not know who you are talking about," Nora lied, her voice shaking badly. "I have no money. You can just take the groceries." Dominic let out a dry, rough laugh. "We do not want your dinner, sweetheart. 3 weeks ago, we almost had a very important target on Highway 41. We shot him twice, watched him bleed out. He was supposed to die right there. But now my source tells me he lived. And there's a rumor his car was seen outside a grubby little diner before he got to his special clinic." He moved one step closer. The knife's blade glinted in the faint light. "Toby Russo is very unhappy. He invested a lot of money in that attack. He needs to know just how Declan Fitzpatrick survived, and he wants to teach a lesson to the person who helped him." "I have no idea what you are talking about," Nora said, her breathing heavy with fear. She looked around desperately for an escape, but the alley was a trap. "Get her," Dominic ordered his men. "Put her in the trunk. Toby wants to personally take her apart." The two big men moved toward her. Nora screamed, and she threw the heavy grocery bag straight into the face of one of the men. Cans of food and fruit scattered on the ground. She tried to dash past them, but a big hand grabbed her hair, pulling her back so hard she saw stars. She was slammed into the brick wall. The impact knocked the wind out of her. Dominic walked up, pushing the cold, flat side of his knife against her cheek. "Stupid girl. You will be screaming a lot more tonight." Suddenly, the loud roar of a powerful engine broke the alley's silence. A sleek, armored black sport utility vehicle raced into the narrow alley, its headlights blindingly bright. It did not even slow down. It crashed right into one of Dominic's men, crushing his leg against a dumpster with a horrible cracking sound. The man shrieked and fell to the pavement. Dominic turned around, blocking the bright lights with his hand as he tried to aim his gun. Before he could shoot, the back doors of the vehicle opened. 4 men jumped out, moving with frightening and perfect teamwork. The soft hiss of silenced weapons cut through the night. Dominic's second man collapsed, clutching a shattered knee. Dominic himself was shot in the shoulder, which spun him around and sent his knife flying into the shadows. "Do not move, Russo filth!" a familiar rough Irish voice called out. Finnick stepped out of the darkness, aiming a large assault rifle at Dominic's head. "Or I will use your head to paint this wall." Nora slid down the brick wall, her legs finally giving way. She shook uncontrollably as she looked at the violent scene. The back door of the sport utility vehicle opened a little more. A man stepped out into the damp night. He moved with more care than before, leaning on a cane with a silver handle, but he still radiated the same overwhelming power. Declan Fitzpatrick was dressed perfectly in a dark navy suit. The pale man who had nearly died in the diner was gone. In his place stood the king of Chicago's underworld, his intense gray eyes focused directly on Nora. He walked to her, the rhythmic tapping of his cane echoing through the alley. The sounds mixed with the pained groans of the injured men. He came to a stop right before her and looked down. "Dominic," Declan said, without taking his eyes off Nora. His voice was smooth, deep, and held absolute command. "You go tell Toby Russo that if he ever sends his men into my territory again, I will do more than just kill his soldiers. I will burn his entire estate to the ground while he is asleep inside." "Go to hell, Fitzpatrick," Dominic spat, his teeth clenched. Declan paid him no attention. He just gave a slight nod. Finnick walked over and hit Dominic across the face with the end of his rifle, knocking him out cold. Declan finally kneeled, wincing a little as the motion seemed to bother his wound. He offered Nora a large, warm hand. "I told you, I am just a waitress," Nora whispered, staring at his hand as if it were a bomb. "Your man told me to forget. I tried to forget everything." Declan's voice was soft, his ruthless mob boss persona cracking for a moment. "I know. And I tried to let you be. But the Russos are not men who believe in luck, and my people were watching to ensure they never found you. Tonight they did." "So what happens now?" Nora asked, the tears of pure exhaustion finally spilling down her face. "You saved me. We are square. Please, just let me walk away." Declan's jaw clenched. He took her hand, his grip firm but careful, and pulled her up. The warmth from his touch was a sharp contrast to the cold alley air. "We are not square, Nora," he said, his intense eyes locking onto hers. "You brought a dead man back to life. In my world, that creates a blood debt. Toby Russo knows your name now. If I leave you, you will be dead before sunrise." "I can run," she argued. "I know how to disappear." "You cannot hide from them," Declan said, his voice deepening to a low rumble that sent a chill through her. "But they cannot harm what belongs to me." Nora's eyes went wide. "I do not belong to you." "You do now," Declan stated, turning towards the waiting sports utility vehicle. "Get in the car, Angel. Your job at the diner is officially over." The Fitzpatrick property in Lake Forest was not a home. It was a fortress pretending to be a monument to generational wealth. It sat on 10 acres of perfect lawns overlooking the dark, angry waters of Lake Michigan. The limestone mansion was guarded by 12-foot wrought iron gates, advanced thermal cameras, and men in suits who moved with the stiff precision of former soldiers. Nora awoke wrapped in cool, heavy Portuguese linens. The bed was more comfortable than anything she had ever felt. The room was immense, decorated in calm shades of gray and cream. Windows from the floor to the ceiling gave a beautiful yet terrifying view of the lake, but when she reached for the polished brass handle on the balcony doors, it refused to move, locked from the outside. A cold, sharp panic pierced the fog of last night's exhaustion. She was a prisoner, an extremely comfortable and well-cared-for prisoner. She threw back the duvet, noticing she was in a silk nightgown that was not hers. Her jeans and the blood-soaked uniform had vanished. Finding a thick cashmere robe on a velvet chair, she pulled it tight and marched to the heavy oak bedroom door. It swung open to a long, carpeted hall filled with original oil paintings and antique lights. Waiting for her, standing just outside, with his hands held neatly behind his back, was Finnick. He looked much calmer than he had at the Midnight Owl, wearing a clean white shirt and a dark vest. The bulge of a gun under his arm, however, spoiled the elegant look. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," Finnick said, his Irish accent noticeable but polite. "I hope you slept well. Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, has left fresh clothes for you in the connected dressing room. We are serving breakfast in the sunroom." "I do not want breakfast," Nora replied, her voice strained. "I want my clothes, my phone, and a taxi to take me back to Logan Square." Finnick gave her a smile that was both kind and completely unyielding. "I am afraid that is not possible. The boss gave very clear orders. You are not to exit the main house without an escort, and you are definitely not going back to your apartment. It has already been emptied. Your things are being delivered here." "He emptied my apartment?" Nora's voice grew louder, bouncing off the high, arched ceiling. He is not allowed to do that. This is kidnapping. It is a relocation to ensure you keep breathing, sweetheart, a new voice cut in. Nora turned as Dr. Sofia Calvetti strode down the hall, carrying a modern leather medical bag. She gave Nora a quick nod. Tobias Russo's men set your apartment building on fire at 4 o'clock this morning. The official story is a gas leak. Unofficially, it was 3 men with gas cans and a lighter. You would be nothing but ash if Declan had not gotten you out of that alley. The news struck Nora like a punch. Her legs felt unsteady, and she gripped the thick doorframe to hold herself up. Her nursing textbooks, her mother's old pictures, the simple life she had worked so hard to create, all of it was gone. A deep sense of loss washed over her, followed by a hot, blinding rage. "Where is he?" Nora asked, her eyes blazing with fury. Finnick paused, glancing at Dr. Calvetti. The doctor just shrugged her shoulders. "He is in his office. He just finished his intravenous antibiotics. Please try not to excite him." Nora did not wait for anyone to lead her. She stormed past Finnick, making her way through the maze-like corridors until she reached a set of huge mahogany double doors. 2 more silent, imposing guards stood beside them. They moved to open the doors for her as she came near. The office smelled like leather, expensive coffee, and the faint, sharp scent of antiseptic. Declan Fitzpatrick was at a massive desk made of dark walnut. He looked very pale. The dark rings beneath his stormy gray eyes stood out against his sharp features. He wore a dark, long-sleeved shirt that was loose enough for the thick bandages underneath. He was studying a pile of financial reports with cold efficiency. He glanced up when she burst in. The irritation on his face disappeared, replaced by a guarded, unreadable look. "You ruined my life," Nora said, her voice shaking with anger. She walked straight to the edge of his huge desk. "Toby Russo ruined your apartment," Declan corrected her calmly, placing his gold fountain pen on the desk. "I told you they would not give up. I just made sure you were not there when it happened." "So what am I supposed to do now?" she shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "Am I supposed to live here, your pet waitress in a fancy cage? I have a life, Declan. I have nursing school I need to pay for. I have bills." Declan got to his feet. He moved slowly, trying to hide the pain coming from his healing wound, but his large frame still filled the room. He took a sleek, black, American Express Centurion card from his desk and slid it across the polished surface toward her. "Your bills are handled," Declan said, his voice a low growl. "Your tuition for the nursing program at Chicago Memorial is paid in full for the next 4 years, through an anonymous scholarship. For anything else you require, use that card." Nora looked at the black card as if it were a deadly spider. "You really think you can just buy me? That you can buy your way out of dragging me into your mob war?" Declan came around the desk, his limp barely noticeable, until he stood only inches away from her. The difference in their height was immense. Nora had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. This close, she saw the faint lines of stress around his mouth, the physical cost of running an empire while his body was trying to heal itself. "I do not buy people, Nora," Declan said, his tone changing, losing the cold edge of a mafia boss and showing the exhausted man beneath. "I protect what belongs to me. You saved my life. You literally reached inside my chest and pulled me back from death. Because of that, Russo made you a target. Until Tobias Russo is dead, and his entire operation is destroyed, you will remain here. You will be kept safe. You will have everything you need. But you will not go outside these gates." "And how much time will that take?" she asked in a whisper, the anger leaving her, replaced by a chilling fear. Declan reached out, and his large, rough thumb gently tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was surprisingly gentle, sending a shock of awareness through her. "As long as it takes to clean up the streets," he replied softly. "Welcome to the family, Angel." 2 weeks passed in a strange and stifling pattern. Nora could go anywhere inside the estate and the walled-in gardens, but she was always being watched by the security team. She spent her days in the giant two-level library, studying first edition medical books and new journals that Declan had acquired just for her. She started to learn the rhythm of the house. She learned Declan drank his coffee black, slept fewer than 4 hours each night, and had meetings in the basement that left his men looking stressed and afraid. She also learned that for all his brutal reputation, he had a quiet and formidable mind. He did not lead by yelling. He led with cold, calculated moves. And she learned that he was also observing her. More than once, she would look up from a book to see him in the library doorway, leaning on his cane with the silver handle, simply watching her. The space between them felt heavy, filled with an unsaid feeling that was somewhere between being thankful, being trapped, and a risky, growing attraction. He never crossed any lines, but his presence was like a constant heavy weight on her new life. The delicate calm was broken on a Thursday evening. A thick, sticky heat had come over Lake Michigan, and with it came a powerful thunderstorm that shook the windows of the mansion. Declan had called a sudden meeting with his closest advisors. Some of his most important captains, including Finnick and a slick, sharp-looking man named Silas, were in the main dining room, pretending to have a formal dinner. Nora had gone to the library to try and study a chapter on heart medication, but the loud, indistinct voices from down the hall made it completely impossible. The syndicate was hemorrhaging cash. Russo's crew had hit 3 of their shipping containers down at the Chicago port, and the payback was getting expensive. Around 11 p.m., the heavy oak doors to the dining room burst open. Nora was just leaving the library when she saw Silas stagger into the hall. The capo's face was deathly pale, covered in a sudden, cold sweat. He grabbed at his chest, his eyes rolling into the back of his head as he crumpled onto the Persian rug, his body immediately locking up in violent convulsions. The hall exploded into chaos. Finnick instantly drew his weapon, searching the empty corridor for a threat. Declan was on his heels, his expression a cold mask of rage. "Get Sophia, now!" Declan yelled, as he fell to his knees beside his convulsing lieutenant. Nora acted on pure instinct. A surge of adrenaline erased any fear of the armed men all around her. She raced down the hallway and slid to her knees next to Silas. "Move," she commanded Declan, pushing his shoulder. "He is having a heart attack," Finnick shouted, pulling out his phone. "It is not a heart attack," Nora snapped back, her eyes scanning Silas's face. She gripped his jaw, prying his mouth open. She leaned in, smelling the air near his mouth. There was a faint, sickly sweet smell, like bitter almonds and garlic. His pupils were like pinpricks. His skin was turning blue. He was rigid, not shaking. She looked at Declan, her heart pounding. What did he eat? What did he drink? We all had the same scotch. Macallan, 25, Declan thought, his mind racing. But Silas is on medication. He took a pill just before dinner. "Who gave it to him?" Nora demanded. A terrible understanding dawned in Declan's dark eyes. He glanced toward a young soldier by the dining room door, a quiet driver named Leo. Leo saw the look on Declan's face, spun around, and ran for the service stairs. "Take him alive!" Declan barked at Finnick. Without a second thought, Finnick took off after the traitor. Nora focused back on Silas. "It is an organophosphate or a synthetic neurotoxin. It must have been in the pill's casing. His breathing is shutting down." Dr. Sophia Calvetti hurried down the hall, her medical bag in hand. Nora did not waste time with questions. "Neurotoxin poisoning, probably from a capsule ingested about 10 minutes ago." Nora delivered the diagnosis with sharp precision. "He needs a maximum dose of atropine immediately, and we have to intubate him or he will drown in his own fluids." Sophia did not question it. She ripped open her bag, grabbed a pre-filled syringe of atropine, and tossed Nora a laryngoscope and an endotracheal tube. "You secure his airway. I will push the meds." Nora's hands were incredibly steady. She expertly tilted Silas's head back, guiding the metal blade of the laryngoscope past his tongue to get a clear view of the vocal cords. "I am in," she announced, carefully threading the plastic tube down his windpipe as Sophia injected the needle into Silas's thigh. For 2 painful minutes, Nora manually pumped the ambu bag, forcing air into the capo's paralyzed lungs. Gradually, the violent seizures started to ease. The awful blue color of his lips began to fade, returning to a pale, unhealthy pink. Sophia took his pulse. "It is stabilizing. We have to get him to the underground clinic and onto a ventilator now." As guards moved in to lift the unconscious Silas onto a stretcher, Nora sank back against the mahogany wainscoting. Her chest heaved, and her hands began to shake without control. As the adrenaline drained away, the hall emptied out, leaving just Nora and Declan. Declan stood over her. Outside, the storm raged, and lightning flashed, highlighting the hard, severe lines of his face. The weight of what just happened filled the silence. Tobias Russo had bought one of Declan's own men. The war was now inside the fortress walls. Declan reached down, took Nora by her upper arms, and smoothly pulled her to her feet. He held on. He gently pushed her backward until the wall stopped her. He was too close, his big frame trapping her. He smelled like rain, good scotch, and the sharp metallic scent of a man prepared for battle. "You did it again," Declan whispered, his voice raw with emotion. His intense eyes searched her face, taking in every sign of her exhaustion. "My fortress has been breached. My men can be bought, and yet the waitress from the late shift is all that stands between my family and death." "I am a nurse," Nora breathed, unable to break his intense stare. "It is my job." "You are a damn miracle," Declan corrected her, his voice lowering to a quiet, respectful whisper. Before she could understand the change in his tone, his hand moved from her arm to her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He leaned in, and his mouth came down hard on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, bruising, and fueled by the adrenaline of near death and betrayal. It tasted like scotch and total possession. Nora gasped against his mouth, her hands flying up to push against his chest. But the second her fingers met the hard muscle under his shirt, her own body betrayed her. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer and matching the fierce, demanding pressure of his kiss. For a man who was always in control, Declan kissed her like he was drowning, and she was his only heir. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathing hard. Declan pressed his forehead against hers with his eyes closed. "Leo will tell us everything Russo has planned," Declan said softly, his tone lethal, a sharp contrast to their intimate position. "And then I will end this war. But understand this, Nora." He opened his eyes, fixing her with a look of terrifying certainty. "You are not just a debt anymore. You are mine." The storm ended before dawn, leaving behind a thick, heavy fog that covered the perfect lawns of the Lake Forest estate. Inside, the air was just as thick, choked with the metallic smell of coming violence. Nora sat on her bed, completely dressed in black pants and a thick sweater. She could not sleep. Her lips still tingled from the memory of Declan's kiss, a clash between two entirely different worlds. It was a clear sign she was no longer just a medical resource or a debt to be repaid. She was now tangled up in the Fitzpatrick syndicate. Down in the soundproof basement, Declan and Finnick were taking apart the traitor, Leo. Nora's stomach twisted at the idea of a mob interrogation, but her analytical mind could not help but imagine the brutal reality of the violence happening downstairs. At 6 a.m., her bedroom door opened. Declan was standing in the doorway. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the neck, the sleeves rolled up, showing forearms tight with tension and spotted with small dark drops of blood. His face was like stone, but his stormy gray eyes softened just a little when he saw her. "Is it over?" Nora asked, her voice hoarse in the heavy silence. Declan went directly to the connected bathroom, turned on the tap, and started to scrub his hands with a rough bar of soap. "Leo talked," Declan said, his voice carrying over the running water. "Russo threatened his little sister, said he would cut her up if Leo did not slip the neurotoxin to Silas." Nora leaned on the bathroom doorframe. So Russo is trying to isolate you. It is worse. Declan turned off the water and threw the towel aside. For the first time, exhaustion showed through his tough exterior. Leo was just the messenger. Russo has someone on the inside, higher up, someone who gave him security schedules, blueprints, and the clinic's timetable. A chill went down Nora's spine. Who? Barrett, Declan said flatly. The name felt like a punch to the gut for Nora. Barrett was in charge of security for the estate. He was the ex-Marine who had walked Nora through the gardens and stood guard at her door. He has been giving Russo information for 6 months, Declan went on. Russo promised him $2 million and control of the South Side routes. Barrett is why I was bleeding all over your counter. Where is he now? Nora's eyes quickly looked toward the hall. Declan looked at his heavy Rolex watch. He is on the day shift, due at the main gate in 20 minutes. When he uses his keycard, the gates will lock him inside. Finnick and I will be waiting in the gatehouse. We will take him alive, find Russo, and finish this. He reached out with his clean hands and held Nora's face. His thumbs gently brushed her cheekbones. Stay here. Lock this door. Do not open it for anyone except me or Finnick. Do you understand? Declan. Promise me, he commanded, his voice filled with a rough desperation. Barrett is a trapped animal. If he figures out we know, he will use the one thing in this house I cannot risk losing. He kissed her on the forehead, a long, protective press of his lips, before walking out. The heavy door clicked, and the deadbolt slid home with a solid thud. Nora paced back and forth, watching the fog swirl outside the large windows. 7 o'clock passed, then 7:15. There was no gunfire, no yelling, just the crushing silence of the huge house. At 7:30, the power suddenly went out. The soft light from the lamps disappeared. The hum of the air conditioning stopped. The backup generators did not turn on. A blackout this big meant the main power grid and all the backups had failed, been deliberately cut. The security chief was the only one with those codes. The doorknob to her bedroom began to turn. Nora moved backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The loud electronic chirp of a master keycard echoed in the dark. The lock clicked open. Barrett entered the room. His usual calm, professional attitude was completely gone. He was covered in sweat, his eyes looked frantic, and he held a silenced Heckler & Koch pistol. Move away from that window, Barrett commanded, shutting the door behind him. And keep your hands where I can see them. Declan is aware, Nora stated, forcing a cold, clinical tone into her voice. Finnick is down at the gate waiting for you. I know, Barrett sneered. That is why I used the old service tunnels near the lake. Fitzpatrick made a big mistake leaving you alone up here while he was out chasing shadows on the property line. He crossed the room in 3 quick steps, grabbed Nora hard, and pushed the cold metal silencer firmly against the side of her head. Walk, he ordered, pushing her toward the door. You are my ticket out of here. Fitzpatrick will let me leave through the front entrance to keep you alive. As Barrett shoved her down the large, curving staircase, Nora's thoughts raced. She thought about the anatomy diagrams and pressure points. Barrett was bigger and had a gun. A direct fight would be suicide. But she was not just a waitress now. She had brought a powerful mob boss back from the brink of death. She understood precisely how a body functions and how it can be broken. They arrived at the huge marble entryway. The heavy, reinforced mahogany doors were 50 feet ahead. Stop right where you are, Barrett. The shout bounced off the walls from the second-floor landing. Declan was at the top of the stairs, a black assault rifle aimed squarely at Barrett's chest. Finnick appeared from the dining room doorway, holding his Glock. 2 more guards emerged from the library. He was completely surrounded. Put the weapon down, you backstabbing son of a bitch, Declan ordered, his voice thick with murderous anger. Drop it, or I will peel the flesh from your body while you are still alive to see it. Barrett did not even blink. He pulled Nora tighter against him, pressing the gun harder into her temple. Stay back, Fitzpatrick, Barrett shouted, his finger turning white on the trigger. Put your weapons down, or I will splatter her brains all over this marble. Tell your men to open the doors and get an armored SUV out front. Right now." Declan's jaw tightened. He glanced at Nora. Her eyes were wide, but she was not shedding a tear. She looked directly at him, sending a silent, urgent plea. "Do not let him get away." "You are already a dead man," Declan said in a low voice, the quiet sound more frightening than his yelling. "Russo can't protect you. Put that gun down, and I will make your death a fast one." "Open the doors!" Barrett yelled, stumbling backward and pulling Nora along with him. Nora knew this was her only chance. When Barrett moved his weight, he lost his balance for a moment. In that instant, Nora let her body go completely limp, while at the same time ramming her elbow backward with full force. She aimed with surgical precision, hitting Barrett's floating ribs, a painful strike to the soft area above his liver. Barrett let out a sharp gasp, his body instinctively jerking from the intense, sharp pain, which made him loosen his hold for just a moment. Nora dropped to the marble floor. "Get him!" she shouted. The entryway exploded with noise. 3 suppressed shots went off at the exact same time. 1 came from Finnick, and 2 from Declan. The powerful bullet sent Barrett flying backward, smashing him through the glass front of an old grandfather clock. He was dead on the floor before the last piece of broken glass hit the ground. A sudden silence filled the space, with only a ringing sound in Nora's ears. Declan was already down the stairs before the gun smoke had cleared. He fell to his knees, his rifle falling to the floor, and pulled Nora into his arms. His hands were shaking badly as he checked her for any injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, the ruthless leader completely gone, replaced by a terrified man. "Nora, please look at me." "I am fine," she breathed out, hiding her face in his neck and smelling the gunpowder. "I am okay." Declan held her tightly, his grip almost painful. Finnick moved the gun away from Barrett's dead hand and took an encrypted burner phone from his vest. "Boss," Finnick said in a low voice, "the last message is a location, a warehouse in Fulton Market. Russo is waiting for him there." Declan slowly let go of Nora. The fear in his dark eyes changed back to hard, cold ice. He got up, helping her to her feet. "Go get Sophia," Declan said to Finnick. "Get the mobile medical unit ready. I want every man here. We are heading to Fulton Market." Nora held Declan's hand tighter. "I am coming with you." "No, you will stay right here. You were nearly killed because of me," Nora replied, her voice filled with complete certainty. "Silas was almost killed in your own hallway. Barrett just tried to shoot me in the head. There is no safe place anymore. If you are going to war, you are going to need a medic." Declan just looked at her, seeing the determined look in her eyes. The waitress who used to hide behind a diner counter was no more. In her place was a woman made strong by his world. A slow, dark smile appeared on his face. "Finnick," Declan said, his eyes still locked on Nora. "Find the lady a Kevlar vest." The Fulton Market area in downtown Chicago was a confusing maze of old, rundown meatpacking plants. Tobias Russo's warehouse was at the end of Kinsey Street, a huge brick building he had used for his private business for many years. At 9:45 in the morning, that piece was broken for good. 4 armored Escalades crashed through the chain-link fence, stopping with a loud screech in the main yard. In the back of the third car, Nora's heart was beating fast against her ribs. She had on a thick Kevlar vest over her sweater, with a small medical kit strapped to her chest. Next to her, Dr. Sofia Calvetti was calmly loading a pump-action shotgun. "Stay down and behind the engine block," Sophia said. "You patch up the holes, and we will make them." Before Nora could understand the command, Declan got out of the first vehicle, with Finnick and 12 armed men right behind him. There was no waiting around. Finnick walked up to the strong steel side door and blasted the hinges off with 2 loud shots. Declan kicked the broken metal door open, and the Fitzpatrick crew rushed into the building. The shooting started immediately. It was a loud and chaotic mix of automatic gunfire and breaking concrete. Russo's men, who were ready for a simple hostage exchange, were caught completely off guard by a full-on attack. "Medic!" a panicked voice cut through the loud gunfire. "Go!" Sophia shouted, giving Nora a push on the shoulder. Nora ran across the open concrete as bullets hit the brick walls above her. She slid on the greasy floor next to Marco, one of Declan's younger men, who was holding his leg where a bullet had passed all the way through his thigh. Her fear disappeared, replaced by her medical training. Nora tore his pant leg open, quickly put a tourniquet high on his leg, and stuffed the wounds with hemostatic gauze. "You are stable now," she said firmly, tightening the windlass. "Do not move." She glanced up through the strange cover of swinging meat hooks. Russo's men were retreating, unable to handle Declan's relentless attack. Declan moved through the chaos with a deadly elegance, his rifle firing in short, controlled shots. He was a king fighting in the dirt with his men. At the other end of the warehouse, in a raised office with glass walls, Tobias Russo was shouting into a radio. His silver suit was covered in dust as he desperately called for backup that was never going to come. Declan saw him. "Cover me!" he yelled, dropping his empty rifle and pulling out a custom 1911 pistol. While Finnick fired a continuous stream of bullets, Declan jumped over a conveyor belt and ran up the metal stairs, not caring about the bullets bouncing around him. He kicked what was left of the office door off its hinges. Nora hurried forward, staying low behind some crates so she could still see him. Inside, Russo lifted a submachine gun. Declan did not hesitate. He shot twice. The first bullet hit Russo's right shoulder, causing his gun to fall to the floor with a clatter. The second bullet struck his right knee, making the rival boss fall with a sickening crunch. The warehouse became strangely quiet, except for the sounds of the injured men. When they saw their leader fall, the last of Russo's soldiers gave up. Finnick's men acted fast, using zip ties to secure them to the support beams. Declan stood over Russo, with smoke slowly rising from his pistol. "It is over, Toby. Your whole operation is mine. Your name will be erased from history." Russo spat out a mouthful of blood. "The feds are watching you, Fitzpatrick. They are going to put you away." "Let them try," Declan said in a low voice, pointing the pistol right between Russo's eyes. "Declan, wait!" Nora's voice called out from the stairs. She went through the broken doorway into the bloody office. Declan looked at her, but his gun did not move. "Get out of here, Nora." "He is bleeding out from his femoral artery," Nora said, pointing to the growing puddle of dark blood near Russo's damaged knee. "If you shoot him in the head, the police will have forensic evidence. It will be an execution. But if he bleeds out, he is just another victim of a gang fight." Declan looked at her. A new kind of respect and dark amusement appeared on his face. He looked down at Russo, whose pale face was a mix of fear and the realization that his artery was cut. "You hear that, Toby?" Declan said, slowly uncocking the hammer and putting his gun away. "The waitress says you are going to bleed." Russo looked at Nora, with both pain and fear in his eyes. "Help me. You are a nurse, please." Nora stared down at him, her expression a complete blank. Flashes of her burned-out apartment filled her mind, the glint of a knife in an alley, and the cold steel of a gun against her head just an hour before. With slow precision, she unlatched her medical kit and placed it on the desk, well beyond his grasp. Her voice was quiet but firm. "My shift is over." She turned away from the dying boss and went to Declan. He was waiting, his arm a solid band around her waist, pulling her in. They left the office as Russo's desperate, choking sounds grew faint behind them. On their way down, they navigated past the wreckage of their fallen foes. Finnick gave a curt nod, directing his crew to the idling trucks. The moment they emerged from the dim warehouse, the Chicago sun finally pierced the thick clouds. It bathed the entire city skyline in a sudden, brilliant light. Declan paused at the open door of his SUV. His gaze fell on Nora as he tenderly wiped a smear of grime and blood from her face. His voice, raspy with fatigue, was barely a whisper. "It is done. This city belongs to us now. You will never need to be afraid again. Nora took in the hard angles of his face and the fierce devotion in his turbulent eyes. She had rescued him on a grimy countertop, and he had set her enemies on fire to protect her. I know, she replied, rising to meet his lips. Declan, let's go home. A true, genuine smile broke across his face. He helped her into the armored vehicle, and the convoy of cars vanished into the heart of the city that was now theirs. In the end, lasting in the world of organized crime is not about who is the quickest draw. It is about who has the ability to mend the wounds after the gunfire has ceased. Nora Hayes did more than just save the life of a dying mob boss on a stormy evening. She breathed new life into an empire and created a dynasty that could never be broken. Declan Fitzpatrick came to understand that real strength was not in a weapon or a foreign bank account, but with the woman who would brave any danger with him. The Midnight Owl Diner no longer exists. In its place stands a modern emergency clinic, financed by a secret donor and managed perfectly by a woman who exchanged a server's uniform for a throne. Their connection was formed in blood and tested by violence. But it was their steadfast loyalty that made it permanent. They now reign as the undisputed king and queen of Chicago. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.